Exploring German history by bike. This time, Andreas Falge is playing host to school pupils from Switzerland. Before setting off, Falge makes a few adjustments to the equipment. The young visitors will spend 3 hours cycling through Berlin along the route of the wall, or what remains of it.
The wall no longer really exists. What we're doing is looking for traces of it. That's all that's left. The wall has been history for 20 years, luckily, but I'll show you a few things.
The mobile history lesson gets underway. All the pupils were born after reunification, and the Cold War is something for the history books. The wall has played a major role in Falge's life. He grew up in its shadow in East Berlin. 20 years after its fall, it's still part of his everyday life. As a tour guide, he knows where to find the remaining segments.
Berlin Wall, Type 4. In spring 1990, you couldn't find a hammer or chisel in the whole of Berlin because everyone was at the wall chipping away at it. There are still lots of multicolored pieces of concrete knocking about. If anybody still wants one, I can deliver.
For the youngsters, the wall isn't as ominous as they'd imagined, and they don't seem particularly impressed.
No, if it were a little higher, perhaps.
If there were a few people standing on it with weapons at the ready, it would be okay.
November 9th, 1989, 11 p.m. The Bornholmer Strasse border crossing was the first to open in Berlin. Andreas Falge was amongst the crowds who poured into the West that night.
Someone in a pub near the border crossing told a friend of mine, he said, "You're kidding. They're not opening the border." Many people in the East couldn't believe it at first. I thought, couldn't they do it at a more reasonable hour? It was November, it was cold, wet. But curiosity got the better of me, and suddenly I was in the thick of things.
That evening, 20 years ago, Andreas made his way to a friend's home in the West. They celebrated all night in a West Berlin bar. To this day, they're still friends, and that bar is still their favorite meeting place. They enjoy reminiscing over a drink. Andreas Falge is particularly proud of the stamp in his old East German passport. He recalls the night that changed the world and his own life forever. He has his own dry way of describing what happened.
Deleting an entire operating system and installing a new one was perhaps not a bad thing. It keeps you flexible. For me, the world became bigger, wider, and more exciting.
Everything changed for Andreas, but not for his friend Michael in West Berlin. Like many Berliners, Michael has stayed in his own neighborhood.
You notice that people like to stay in their own areas, and the wall's still there even if you can't see it. People don't automatically cross it of their own accord.
Yes, but that's because Berliners tend to stay close to home, because the city's just so big.
Next on the program for the Swiss students is a visit to one of the old watchtowers along the inner city border. It's now a museum. The warden's brother was the first person to be killed trying to escape to West Berlin.
I was 14 when the wall fell. These youngsters were born after that. For them, it's something foreign, distant history. But they're getting a good impression of what it was like back then.
He knows a lot, he has a lot to tell, and it's really exciting when he talks about it.
The group moves on along the banks of the Spree River, where the wall once stood.